The drive up to Pinewood Tower took longer than expected. The Forest Service map claimed it was 20 miles from the ranger station, but the winding switchbacks and deteriorating road conditions stretched those miles into a 3-hour journey. My old Jeep Cherokee handled it well enough, though the suspension complained with every pothole and rock. I killed the engine at the base of the tower and sat for a moment, taking in my home for the next year. Pinewood Fire Lookout stood on a rocky outcrop rising about 60 feet above the surrounding wilderness on stilts that looked too spindly for comfort. A wooden staircase zigzagged up to the cabin at the top, a perfect square box with windows on all sides. Practical, isolated, exactly what I wanted. The tower creaked as I climbed the stairs with my first load of supplies. Each step groaned under my weight, the whole structure swaying slightly in the afternoon breeze. Not exactly reassuring. I paused halfway up, looking out over the dense forest stretching to the horizon. The Black Rock Mountains lived up to their name, dark, imposing peaks cutting into the sky like broken teeth. Miles of wilderness in every direction. Perfect. The cabin door stuck when I tried to open it. I set down my duffel and put my shoulder into it, feeling the wood give way with a reluctant scrape. The interior was about what I expected. A single room, maybe 15 by 15 feet. A narrow cot pushed against one wall. A small propane stove and sink occupied the corner. The center featured the observation desk with maps and equipment for spotting fires. Radio equipment sat on a shelf, along with log books and weather instruments. It took 4 trips to haul everything up. By the time I finished, sweat had soaked through my shirt despite the cool mountain air. I arranged my belongings methodically, clothes in the small dresser, food supplies in the cabinets, toiletries next to the basic sink. I'd packed light, bringing only necessities plus a few books and my brother's old chess set. The radio squawked to life as I was organizing the small kitchenette. Pinewood Tower, this is Ranger Station. Come in, Pinewood. I crossed to the radio and picked up the handset. Ranger Station, this is Pinewood. Reading you clear. Thorne, that you? Carl Westbrook here. Just checking if you made it up all right. Yes, sir. Just getting settled in now. Good. There was a pause, then. Remember, standard radio checks at 0800 and 1700 hours. Keep an eye on that lightning ridge to the south. We've had a couple close calls there already this season. Copy that. How's the tower looking? Any maintenance issues I should know about? Carl's voice was gruff but professional. I glanced around. Door sticks a bit. Some of the window seals look worn, nothing major. Write it all down in the log. I'll send a maintenance crew when we can spare one. Another pause. Look, Thorne, I know you requested this assignment specifically, but Pinewood is, well, it's not an easy post. Just follow protocols and report anything unusual, all right? Something in his tone made me pause. Unusual like what? Weather anomalies, wildlife behavior, anything that doesn't seem right. He cleared his throat. Standard procedure. It didn't sound like standard procedure, but I wasn't about to argue with my new boss. Understood. Good. Ranger Station out. The radio fell silent, leaving me alone with the soft creaking of the tower. I finished organizing my supplies, then conducted a proper inspection of my new home. Most of the equipment was older than me but well maintained. The observation instruments, binoculars, weather station, spotting scope, all functioned perfectly. The logbooks went back several years, with neat entries from previous lookouts. As the afternoon stretched into evening, I heated a can of beef stew on the small propane stove and ate while watching the sun drop toward the western peaks. The windows provided a perfect 360-degree view of the surrounding wilderness. To the east, the forest stretched unbroken to distant mountains. North and south, the ridgeline continued, covered in dense pine. The western view showed the steepest drop, the cliff face falling away to a valley several hundred feet below. Darkness came quickly in the mountains. I switched on the small desk lamp, its yellow glow making the windows turn into black mirrors reflecting the cabin interior. The tower felt different in the dark, smaller somehow, yet more exposed. The forest noises intensified, owls calling, branches creaking, the occasional distant howl that might have been wolf or coyote. I was logging the day's weather observations when I first noticed it, a faint greenish glow on the northern horizon. At first, I thought it might be the aurora borealis, though we were too far south for that to be common. I moved to the north-facing windows and cut the cabin lights to get a better view. The light pulsed rhythmically, growing slightly brighter, then dimming in a pattern that seemed almost deliberate. 3 quick pulses, followed by a longer glow, then darkness, then repeat. It was oddly familiar. A year ago, during my temporary assignment at Eagle Point Tower about 50 miles northeast of here, I'd seen something similar, just once, on my first night. I'd reported it as possible atmospheric phenomena, and my supervisor had dismissed it as probably northern lights or light pollution from a distant town, but there were no towns in that direction, and these weren't northern lights. The memory triggered something else, a small notation in the orientation packet. Report any unusual atmospheric phenomena immediately. Standard protocol, they'd said. I returned to the radio. Ranger Station, this is Pinewood. Come in. Static hissed for several seconds before a response came. Pinewood, this is Ranger Station. Go ahead. Carl's voice sounded tired. Sir, I'm observing some unusual light activity to the north. Pulsing green light seems to be about 5 to 10 miles out. Rhythmic pattern, possibly. What? Carl cut me off, his voice suddenly alert. Green light? You're sure? Affirmative. Pulsing green light on the northern horizon. I saw something similar last year at Eagle Point. The radio went silent for so long I thought we'd lost connection. When Carl's voice returned, it was different. Tense, urgent. Thorne, listen carefully. Get inside immediately. Lock all doors and windows. Stay away from the glass. I am inside, sir. Then lock everything now. Board up the windows if you can. Whatever you do, don't respond to anything outside. Do you understand? Don't answer if you hear anything outside the tower. My pulse quickened. What's going on, Carl? What is that light? Just do as I say. I'll explain when I can. Secure the tower and maintain radio silence until morning. That's an order. Sir, I need to know what... The radio cut off mid-sentence, leaving only static. I tried several times to re-establish contact, but received no response. I looked back toward the northern horizon. The green light was definitely brighter now, pulsing faster. It seemed to be moving through the trees, still several miles away, but definitely approaching the tower. Despite the absurdity of the situation, something in Carl's voice had triggered a primal response. I moved quickly, checking the door lock and jamming a chair under the handle for good measure. The windows had no locks, but there were plywood shutters stored beneath the bed for storm protection. I wrestled them into place over the northern and eastern windows, securing them with the wing nuts provided. The forest had gone completely silent. No insects chirping, no night birds calling. The absolute silence was more unnerving than any noise could have been. Even the constant background creaking of the tower had stopped, as if the entire structure was holding its breath. I finished securing the southern windows and moved to the western side, where the green light was now visible from a different angle. It had definitely drawn closer, pulsing among the trees perhaps a mile away now. The unnatural glow illuminated the forest in strobing flashes, creating disorienting shadows that seemed to move independently of the light source. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the last plywood sheet into place. Before securing it, I took one final look. The light had reached the base of the cliff below the tower. From this angle, I could see it wasn't a single light source, but rather a shifting, flowing luminescence that moved like liquid through the trees. As it reached the clearing at the cliff base, it pooled and pulsed brighter. A wave of dread washed over me, inexplicable, overwhelming. This wasn't just fear of the unknown. It was deeper, more visceral, as if something deep in my DNA recognized a predator my conscious mind couldn't comprehend. I secured the final shutter and retreated to the center of the room, away from all windows. The darkness felt suddenly oppressive, but I hesitated to turn on any lights. Instead, I switched on my flashlight and pointed it at the floor, creating a small circle of illumination. A heavy thud shook the entire tower. I froze, holding my breath. Another thud followed, stronger this time. The tower swayed slightly. Something was at the base of the structure. The thuds continued, moving from the foundation to the staircase. The rhythmic impacts followed the zigzag pattern of the stairs, getting closer with each hollow boom. Whatever it was climbing toward me. Then silence. I stood motionless in my small circle of light, straining to hear any sound over the pounding of my heart. Seconds stretched into a minute, 2 minutes. "James?" The voice came from directly outside the door. "James, it's Carl. There's been a misunderstanding. You need to open up." It sounded exactly like Carl. The same gruff tone, the same slight rasp in his throat. But something was wrong. The voice had an unnatural resonance, as if someone had recorded Carl and was playing him back, slightly distorted. "I drove up as soon as we got disconnected," the voice continued. "Just a technical problem with the radio. Everything's fine now." I remained silent, remembering Carl's instruction not to respond to anything outside. "James, I know you're in there. Open the door so we can talk. That's an order." My hand actually twitched toward the door before I caught myself. Carl couldn't possibly have driven up here in the 20 minutes since our radio call. The ranger station was over an hour away, even driving at dangerous speeds on the forest roads. "James." The voice changed subtly, becoming more resonant, more persuasive. "If you don't open this door, I'll have to report your insubordination. You'll lose this position. Is that what you want?" I backed away, bumping into the observation desk. The small chess set I'd unpacked earlier, Mark's chess set, toppled to the floor, pieces scattering in the darkness beyond my light's reach. Outside, the thing pretending to be Carl fell silent. For a moment, I thought it might have left. Then a new voice spoke, a voice that turned my blood to ice. "Jimmy, it's me. I need help." It was Mark's voice, my brother's voice, my dead brother's voice. "Jimmy, it's me. I need help." I stumbled backward, knocking over the small table behind me. My brother's voice was perfect, the slight southern drawl he'd picked up during college, the way he'd say my name with that familiar lift at the end. But Mark had been dead for 5 years. "Come on, Jimmy. Open the door." The voice was pleading now. "I've been lost out here for so long." I pressed my back against the inner wall of the tower, as far from the door as possible. My hands trembled as I gripped the flashlight tighter, its beam wobbling across the floor. "I know you're in there," Not Mark continued. "Remember that time we got lost in the Cascades? You found us a way out then. I need you to do that again." My throat constricted. We had gotten lost on a backpacking trip when Mark was 16. We'd wandered off-trail and spent a terrifying night huddled under a makeshift shelter before I navigated us back using the stars. It wasn't something I'd told many people about. "That's not my brother," I whispered to myself. Mark is dead. A heavy thud hit the door, making the entire tower shudder. "James!" The voice changed, becoming distorted and multi-layered, as if several people were speaking simultaneously. "Open the door!" I slid down the wall until I sat on the floor, knees pulled to my chest. The green light pulsed through the cracks in my hastily installed window coverings, casting alien shadows that stretched and receded with each flare. Minutes stretched into hours. I checked my watch, 10:47 p.m. The entity outside cycled through different approaches, sometimes pleading, sometimes threatening. It would fall silent for 20 minutes, then suddenly slam against the walls with such force, I feared the entire structure might collapse. "You're making a mistake," Carl's voice returned, sounding even more convincing than before. "There's a fire approaching from the south ridge. We need to evacuate now, Thorne. That's a direct order." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. There was no fire. I'd been scanning the forests all day. It was my job to spot fires. "Fine," the voice finally said. "I'll radio for backup. You've put us both in danger." Silence followed, broken only by the creak of the tower settling. I allowed myself to breathe more deeply, wondering if it had given up. My watch read 11:36 p.m. I crawled toward the emergency kit I'd unpacked earlier, fishing out some water and a protein bar. My hands shook so badly, I could barely unscrew the bottle cap. "This is ridiculous." I froze, water bottle halfway to my lips. The voice was mine now, exactly my voice, with my specific cadence and slight raspiness. "I'm locked out of my own tower," my voice continued from outside. "I just went down to check something at the base, and now I can't get back in." I pressed my palms against my ears, but the voice cut through regardless. "Hello? Is someone in there? This is James Thorne, fire lookout assigned to Pinewood Tower. Whoever you are, you're trespassing on federal property." The entity had my professional tone perfect. The slight formality I slipped into when dealing with hikers who wandered too close to restricted areas. I remained silent, remembering Carl's warning. Around 1:30 a.m., it shifted tactics again. Instead of speaking, it began making noises, subtle at first, then increasingly disturbing. The sound of labored breathing, fingernails scratching across wood, a low animal whimpering that made the hair on my neck stand up. "Jimmy." Mark's voice returned at precisely 2 a.m. according to my watch. Softer now, intimate. "Remember when we built that treehouse and Dad got so mad? Said we'd ruin his prized oak?" His laugh was exactly as I remembered, short, with that slight snort at the end. "Man, I thought he was going to blow a gasket. But you stood up for me. Told him it was your idea even though we both know it wasn't." My chest tightened. I'd never told anyone about that. Not even Sarah during our marriage. It had been our secret, mine and Mark's, a bonding moment between brothers that we'd referenced through coded jokes for years afterward. "I need your help again, Jimmy. Just like back then." My hand moved toward the door of its own accord. I caught myself, fingers inches from the lock, and yanked back as if burned. "It's not him," I whispered. "Mark is dead. He fell. I identified his body. He's gone." "I didn't fall, Jimmy," the voice responded immediately. "That's what they wanted you to think. I've been trapped out here. Please." Something cold settled in my stomach. It had heard me. Through solid walls, it had heard my whispered words. "Remember that girl in Portland? Melissa? The one I was too scared to ask out, so you pretended to be me on the phone?" Mark's voice grew more insistent. "Or that time I borrowed your car in college and scraped the door? I paid to fix it before you noticed, but I never told you." Each detail was perfect, each memory authentic. My mind raced. How could it know these things? Had it somehow accessed my memories? Or worse, had it somehow accessed Mark's? I covered my ears and started humming an old Nirvana song, trying to drown out the voice. But it adjusted, growing louder. "You still have my chess set," it called. "The one Grandpa gave me. You take it everywhere, Jimmy. You're looking at it right now, aren't you?" My eyes flicked involuntarily to the scattered chess pieces on the floor where I'd knocked them earlier. A chill ran through me. "You promised to look out for me, Jimmy. You promised. And where were you when I needed you most?" That cut deeper than anything else. The guilt I'd carried since Mark's death, that I should have been there, should have stopped him from attempting that dangerous climb alone. The entity had found the raw nerve in my psyche and was pressing down hard. Hour after hour, it continued, focusing exclusively on Mark's voice now. It had found my weakness and exploited it relentlessly. I curled into a ball, rocking slightly, trying to block it out. "He's dead," I repeated to myself. "This isn't real." As the night dragged on, I noticed the quality of the green light changing. Through gaps in the window coverings, I could see it pulsing faster, more erratically. The voice outside became increasingly desperate. "Jimmy, it's almost too late. They're coming for me again. Please, I'm begging you. I won't survive another day out here." The tower temperature dropped suddenly. My breath fogged in front of me. The metal fixtures began to frost over despite the summer night. "It's cold out here, Jimmy. So cold. Let me in." By 5:30 a.m., I could see the faintest lightening of the sky through the eastern window cracks. Mark's voice took on a frantic quality. "No, Jimmy, please. They're coming back. Don't let them take me again." The pounding on the walls intensified, coming from all directions simultaneously, as if a dozen fists were hammering the tower. The entire structure swayed dangerously. When the first ray of sunlight broke over the eastern ridge, an inhuman shriek tore through the air. Nothing like Mark's voice, nothing human at all. It was the sound of rage and frustration and something else. Hunger, perhaps. The noise went on, modulating through frequencies that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. Then silence. Complete, absolute silence. I remained frozen in place for nearly an hour, unable to trust that it was truly gone. Eventually, I crawled to the eastern window and carefully removed a small section of the plywood covering. Sunlight streamed in, pure and normal. The forest looked peaceful below, showing no sign of the night's disturbance. I methodically checked each window, then finally the door. Nothing waited outside. The green light had vanished completely. My legs gave out and I slumped to the floor, exhausted beyond measure. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, the radio was squawking. "Pinewood Tower, this is Ranger Station. Come in, Pinewood. James, do you copy?" I dragged myself to the radio, every muscle protesting. "Ranger Station, this is Pinewood," I croaked, my voice hoarse from hours of stress. Carl's voice, the real Carl this time, responded with undisguised relief. "You made it, thank God." "What was that thing, Carl?" I asked, too tired for pretense. There was a long pause. "There are things in these mountains we don't understand, Thorne. Things older than the Forest Service, older than the country itself. Why wasn't I warned? Would you have believed me? Would you have taken the position?" I had no answer for that. "Your tower is the only one they visit," Carl continued. "Always on the first of the month. I'm sorry you had to experience it alone the first time." I glanced at the calendar pinned beside the radio. July 1st. The realization of what Carl was saying hit me like a physical blow. 12 more visits to go. he said grimly. "One each month of your assignment. We'll talk about preparations for the next one when you've had some rest." I replaced the handset without responding. Sunlight filled the tower now, innocent and warm. I began picking up the scattered chess pieces from the floor, examining each one before returning it to the set. Mark's set. Outside, birds had resumed their morning songs as if nothing had happened. But I knew better now. Whatever waited in the northern woods would return, and next time, I would be ready. I returned the last ivory chess piece to the velvet-lined box, my hand lingering on the king. Mark had always played white, aggressive and bold, while I preferred black's reactive strategy. The polished pieces gleamed in the morning sunlight streaming through the newly uncovered windows, the only evidence of normalcy after a night that defied explanation. The radio remained silent for the rest of the day. Carl didn't elaborate on his cryptic warning, and I didn't ask. I needed time to process what had happened, to convince myself I hadn't hallucinated the entire experience. The scratches on the doorframe proved I hadn't. 3 weeks passed in a blur of routine fire watches and weather reports. I maintained radio contact with Carl, our conversations strictly professional. Neither of us mentioned that night, but the unspoken knowledge hung between us, coloring every exchange with tension. My sleep came in fractured intervals, interrupted by the slightest creak of the tower or whisper of wind. By the third Wednesday after the incident, I couldn't stand the questions multiplying in my mind. During my scheduled morning check-in, I asked Carl for permission to visit Riverdale. "Need supplies already?" he asked, his voice crackling through the radio. "Research," I replied simply. A long pause followed before Carl responded. "The county library closes at 6. Don't be on those roads after dark." I took his warning as permission. 30 minutes later, I was bumping down the service road in my weathered Jeep, the tower shrinking in my rearview mirror. Riverdale sat nestled between pine-covered hills, a small logging town that had seen better days. Main Street featured the usual small-town fixtures: a diner, hardware store, post office, all with that particular faded quality of places time was slowly forgetting. The county library occupied a squat brick building at the edge of town, its American flag hanging limp in the still air. Inside, the air conditioning hit me like a wall, a sharp contrast to the July heat. A handful of patrons browsed the stacks or hunched over ancient computers. At the front desk, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses looked up from his catalog. "Can I help you?" His voice matched his appearance, precise and measured. "I'm researching local history," I said, keeping my voice casual. "Specifically anything related to Pinewood Tower and the surrounding area." Something flickered behind his glasses, recognition, maybe concern. "Another lookout from Pinewood," he remarked, not quite a question. My stomach tightened. "You've helped others?" "Over the years." He extended a bony hand. "Eldon Peterson, head librarian. The regional archives are this way." Peterson led me through a maze of shelves to a back room lined with metal filing cabinets and acid-free storage boxes. A sign on the door read, "Local History Collection, Staff Access Only." "Most people come looking for mining records or family histories," Peterson said as he unlocked the door. "But Pinewood lookouts always want the same materials." He pulled a banker's box from a bottom shelf, setting it on a wooden table in the center of the room. The label read simply, "Forestry Service Records, 1960-1990. "I'll leave you to it," Peterson said. "The collection doesn't leave this room. I'll be at the front desk if you need anything." Alone with the box, I felt a strange reluctance to open it. Whatever I found would make the experience real in a way I wasn't sure I wanted. I removed the lid, Inside, manila folders contained official Forest Service documents, maintenance reports, wildlife surveys, personnel records. Beneath these lay a collection of leather-bound journals and spiral notebooks, each labeled with a year and name. Personal logs of Pinewood Tower lookouts, read the inventory sheet. The earliest dated to 1967, the year the tower was constructed according to the building specifications in another folder. I started with the oldest journal, belonging to a Howard Jennings. His entries began with enthusiastic descriptions of wildlife sightings and weather patterns, but by September, the tone shifted. September 1st, 1967. Observed unusual aurora to the north tonight. Radio communication interrupted for several hours. Reported to headquarters. October 1st, 1967. The northern lights returned, stronger this time. Heard voices outside that couldn't possibly be there. Will request transfer tomorrow. His final entry, dated October 2nd, was a single line. No one believes me. They think it's the isolation. I moved through journal after journal, a pit forming in my stomach as patterns emerged. Different handwriting, different decades, same experiences. Some called it the monthly visitor, others the northern lights, or the green phenomenon. A lookout named Rebecca Chen in 1973 wrote extensively about the mimic. It knows everything about Justin, things only he and I shared. How is this possible? It's not just mimicking his voice. It knows our memories. The 1982 journal hit me hardest. Thomas Blackwood had lasted 9 months, his neat handwriting deteriorating as the journal progressed. He documented protective measures in methodical detail. Salt barriers around the tower's perimeter, religious symbols from various traditions, mirrors covering every window. His final entry, dated September 2nd, 1982, simply read, "It found a way in. No further explanation. No record of what happened to him after." As I reached the end of the box, Peterson appeared in the doorway. "Finding what you need?" he asked, eyes flicking to the open journals spread across the table. "What happened to them?" I asked. "The lookouts who wrote these." Peterson removed his glasses, polishing them with a cloth from his pocket. "Some transferred out, some completed their rotations. And the others?" He replaced his glasses precisely. Official records typically cite accidents or desertions. Isolated postings attract troubled individuals after all. The careful neutrality in his voice told me everything he wasn't saying. "Have you ever been to Pinewood Tower yourself?" I asked. "Once, many years ago." Peterson glanced at his watch. "We close in 30 minutes. Will you need copies of any materials?" I selected the most detailed journals, including Blackwood's, and asked for photocopies. Peterson handled each with practiced care, never commenting on the contents as pages filled with desperate accounts passed through his hands. As he handed me the folder of copies, he said quietly, "The pattern is monthly, always on the 1st. That gives you preparation time, which is more than some had." Before I could respond, he returned to the front desk, leaving me with my copies and the distinct impression that the quiet librarian knew far more than he'd shared. The sun hung low as I emerged from the library, casting long shadows across the street. I needed to get back before dark, but one more stop felt necessary. At the hardware store, I purchased door reinforcement plates, extra locks, aluminum foil, and a heavy flashlight with spare batteries. The clerk raised an eyebrow at my selection, but rang me up without comment. Back at Pinewood, I spent the next days transforming the tower. I installed additional locks and barricaded the windows with aluminum foil, partly from the journal's suggestions that reflective surfaces sometimes repelled the entity. partly to block the green light from entering. The storage closet became my refuge, reinforced with extra shelving and stocked with water, non-perishable food, and first aid supplies. The week before, the first approached too quickly. I drove to the ranger station for my scheduled check-in, bringing the photocopied journals with me. Carl's raised eyebrows were the only acknowledgement of my research. "Thought you might want these on file," I said, sliding the folder across his desk. "Already have copies," he replied, though he accepted the folder anyway. "Find anything useful?" I leaned forward. Salt barriers, religious symbols, reflective surfaces, they've all been tried. Nothing works consistently. Carl's weathered face remained impassive. Every lookout thinks they'll be the one to solve it. "I'm just trying to survive it," I countered. "The journals mention iron might help." He nodded slightly. "Old folklore about cold iron repelling certain entities seems to have some truth to it. But listen carefully, Thorne. What works once won't work twice. It adapts." I spent the rest of the afternoon in the station's small library, researching mimicking entities in world folklore. They appeared across cultures with different names: skinwalkers, doppelgangers, Vardogers, but always associated with isolated locations and the ability to perfectly imitate loved ones. As I was leaving, Carl handed me a package wrapped in brown paper. "Hunting season's coming," he said loudly enough for the other rangers to hear. "Thought you might need this." Inside the package was a Remington 870 shotgun with a box of shells. When I looked up questioningly, Carl shook his head minutely. "Won't stop it," he said under his breath, "but might slow it down if things get desperate." The day before the first, Carl's voice crackled over the radio during our evening check-in. "Turn off all electronics during the visit," he advised. "It can manipulate them. Radio, flashlights, anything battery-operated." "How am I supposed to see?" I asked. "Kerosene lantern, matches, nothing it can control from outside." I swallowed hard. "And if it gets inside?" Carl's silence lasted so long, I thought he'd gone. Finally, "Remember, whatever voices you hear aren't real people, no matter how convincing." The 1st of August arrived with perfect blue skies and gentle breezes that seemed to mock the dread building in my chest. I spent the day making final preparations, checking and rechecking my defenses. As sunset approached, I positioned myself in the center of the room, surrounded by supplies, the shotgun across my knees. Darkness fell. Minutes stretched into hours. The forest outside remained unnervingly quiet, as if wildlife sensed what was coming. My watch read 10:16 p.m. The tension of waiting was almost worse than the encounter itself. Had I imagined the whole thing? Had Carl been humoring a paranoid new lookout? At precisely 10:17 p.m., the green light appeared again on the northern horizon. Even through the aluminum-covered windows, I could see it pulse faster and more rhythmically than before. A cold sweat broke across my skin as I gripped the shotgun tighter. The second visit had begun. The clock read 10:15 p.m. when I checked it for the 20th time. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The shotgun lay across my knees, loaded, but ultimately useless, according to Carl. I'd disabled the tower's main electricity earlier that evening, switching to the kerosene lantern that now cast long shadows across my reinforced sanctuary. 2 minutes later, it started. The green light appeared on the northern horizon exactly as before, but something was different. Instead of flowing like liquid through the trees, it fragmented into dozens of distinct orbs. They hovered at the forest's edge, pulsing in unison before separating in all directions. I pressed my eye against a small gap in the aluminum foil covering the windows. The orbs moved with purpose, surrounding Pinewood Tower in a perfect circle. More appeared, until they formed a complete ring around the base of my stilted refuge. "No," I whispered as they began to rise. The orbs floated upward in perfect synchronization, bathing the tower in that sickly green glow. Shadows disappeared as light came from every direction at once, creating an eerie, constant twilight inside despite my window coverings. Green illumination seeped through every crack and seam of the cabin. I retreated to the center of the room, gripping the shotgun tighter. The journals mentioned nothing about this behavior. The entity was changing tactics. "James." The voice struck me like a physical blow. Sarah's voice, not my brother's, not Carl's, but the precise intonation of my ex-wife. "James, please, I've been driving for hours to find you." My throat constricted. 2 years since our divorce, yet her voice still carried that same note of exasperation mixed with concern that had characterized the final months of our marriage. "You left your cell phone at the house again. I had to call the Forest Service just to locate you." The entity had abandoned its previous approach of cycling through different voices. This time it had chosen its weapon with surgical precision. "This is how you deal with problems, isn't it?" Sarah's voice hardened with the familiar edge that emerged during our worst arguments. "Running away to the middle of nowhere instead of talking things through." I stayed silent, focusing on the familiar weight of the shotgun. This wasn't Sarah. It couldn't be. "We could have fixed things, James. I wanted to fix things, but you were never there, even when you were physically present." The accuracy of the criticism made my chest ache. Those were almost the exact words she'd used during our last real conversation. "Why did you abandon our family when we needed you?" The question hung in the silence. We'd never had children, but we'd talked about it, planned for it. The pregnancy test had been positive just weeks before Mark's accident. After his death, I'd shut down completely. Sarah miscarried during the 3rd month. The doctors said stress wasn't to blame, but I never believed them. "You checked out after Mark died," continued the perfect simulation of Sarah's voice, softer now. "I was grieving too, James. I lost the baby. I lost my husband, even though you were still breathing right next to me." How could it know these details? I'd never discussed the miscarriage with anyone at the Forest Service. These weren't facts someone could research in public records. The lantern flame suddenly flared brighter before diminishing to nearly nothing. Impossible. There'd been no breeze. "I'm turning on a light," Sarah's voice said. "I can barely see you." The overhead light flickered on, harsh fluorescent illumination filling the cabin. My blood ran cold. I'd disabled the main power myself, removing fuses from the breaker box outside. I'd checked it twice. "That's better," said Sarah's voice as the light stabilized. "Now I can see how you're hiding from me, just like always." I forced myself up and moved to the wall switch, flicking it off. The light remained on. "Don't," Sarah's voice warned. "I need to see your face when we talk about this." I yanked the shotgun up and fired directly into the ceiling fixture. Glass and plastic rained down as darkness reclaimed the cabin. The kerosene lantern still provided a small circle of light. "Really mature, James," Sarah's voice sighed from directly behind me. I spun around, heart hammering. Nothing was there. "Our therapist said your avoidance was a defense mechanism," the voice continued, now from near the door. "What are you defending yourself from? The truth?" The temperature in the cabin plummeted suddenly. My next breath came out as fog. The metal window frames accumulated frost in seconds, ice crystals forming in delicate patterns across the aluminum foil coverings. "The cold doesn't bother me," said Sarah's voice. "But you always hated winter, didn't you? Our trip to Tahoe was miserable because you refused to ski when the temperature dropped below freezing. Another disappointment. The lantern flame stuttered and died, plunging the room into darkness except for the green glow seeping through the frosted windows. I fumbled for my flashlight, clicking it on. "I found your journal," Sarah's voice whispered from somewhere in the darkness. "The one you kept hidden in your desk. I know what you wrote about me." I'd never kept a journal. The entity was fishing, trying different approaches to get a reaction. "You blamed me for pressuring you to start a family," the voice continued. "But it was mutual. We both wanted children until Mark died. Then you decided our marriage wasn't worth fighting for. I bit my lip until I tasted blood. The truth in its words cut deeper than any physical weapon could have." The radio on my desk suddenly crackled to life, static hissing through the speaker. I stared at it in disbelief. I'd disconnected it and removed the backup batteries hours ago. "Thorn, can you hear me?" Carl's voice burst through the static. "The entity has already breached the tower. It's inside with you." I recognized the trick immediately. Carl wouldn't know what was happening at my tower unless I reported it first. I strode across the room and smashed the radio with the butt of the shotgun until it was a mess of broken plastic and circuit boards. "He was trying to help you," Sarah's voice said mildly. "But you've always pushed away people who try to help. Your brother, your wife, now your supervisor." The flashlight beam began to dim, the batteries draining impossibly fast. I switched it off to conserve what power remained. For hours, the voice continued recounting our relationship. The early days when we'd been happy, the gradual withdrawal after Mark's death, the arguments that became increasingly bitter, the couple's therapy that came too late. It knew everything, even private jokes and intimate moments that no one else could possibly know. At precisely 3 a.m., according to my watch, Sarah's voice fell silent mid-sentence. The sudden absence of sound was almost more terrifying than the voice itself. Then came the scratching. It started as a faint rasp against the eastern wall, like fingernails dragging across wood. Within seconds, similar sounds emerged from every wall, the ceiling, even the floor beneath my feet. Not coordinated, but chaotic and frenzied, as if countless claws were trying to pierce the structure from all directions. I pressed my back against the cast iron stove, sweeping the dying flashlight beam across the walls. The scratching stopped in sections as the light passed over them, only to resume when darkness returned. The sound became more desperate, more determined, punctuated by splintering wood as whatever made the noise began breaking through the outer layer of the cabin. The scratching couldn't penetrate areas near the stove. A realization struck me. The entity avoided iron. I remembered a page from one of the journals mentioning cold iron as a potential deterrent. I scrambled around the cabin, gathering every iron object I could find: cast iron cookware, tools from the maintenance box, nails, the iron poker for the stove. I arranged them in a circle around me, creating a small protective perimeter. The scratching intensified everywhere except where the iron objects faced the walls. A high-pitched shriek cut through the air, a sound of frustration and rage that bore no resemblance to any human voice. I huddled in my makeshift fortress for hours, listening to the relentless assault on the tower. My eyes burned from exhaustion, but I didn't dare close them. The temperature remained freezing, my body shivering uncontrollably despite the multiple layers I wore. The green light outside pulsed faster, growing more erratic as the first hint of dawn appeared in the east. The scratching became desperate, frantic, as if the entity knew its time was running out. When the sun finally broke the horizon, the green orbs flickered and disappeared one by one. The scratching ceased abruptly. The temperature in the cabin began to rise immediately, ice melting from the windows. I remained in my iron circle for another hour, muscles cramped and body exhausted. When I finally emerged, daylight streamed through the gaps in the aluminum foil, revealing the devastation. Every wall of the tower was covered with thousands of deep scratches, 3 parallel lines grouped together like claw marks. They covered every surface except the areas directly opposite my iron objects. The cast iron stove stood untouched, while the wooden flooring around it was shredded. Even the ceiling had been scored deeply, except for a perfect circle beneath the iron light fixture I'd shot. My hands trembled as I picked up the backup radio I'd hidden in the storage closet. Carl answered on the first call. "Thorn, you made it." Relief colored his voice. "It knew things," I said, my voice hoarse from disuse. "About Sarah, about our marriage, things I've never told anyone." "It pulls from your mind," Carl said grimly. "The longer it's around you, the more it can access." "The iron worked," I reported, surveying the untouched areas around iron fixtures. "It couldn't get past it." A heavy sigh came through the speaker. "Old folklore about iron is true then." He paused. "But remember, each visit they adapt. No defense works twice." I sank to the floor, my back against the iron stove. "It's learning." "Yes," Carl confirmed, "and it'll be back on the 1st of September with new tricks." I disconnected the radio and surveyed the ruined interior of my tower. 29 days until the next visit. 29 days to find a new defense. The protective circle of iron objects still lay on the floor where I'd arranged them. I picked up a heavy wrench, feeling its weight in my hand. For one night, simple iron had kept the entity at bay, but Carl was right. I couldn't rely on the same solution twice. Next time, the entity would be ready. And so would I. The conference room at Morrison City Forestry headquarters felt unnaturally sterile after months surrounded by wilderness. Maps lined 3 of the 4 walls, satellite images, topographical surveys, and what looked like hand-drawn charts from another century. I shifted uncomfortably in the metal chair as District Supervisor Ramirez spread several folders across the table between us. "I appreciate you making the drive down, Thorn." She adjusted her glasses with practiced precision, "especially given what's coming tomorrow night. Tomorrow, the 1st of the month. My 3rd encounter with whatever waited at Pinewood." "This isn't standard procedure," Ramirez continued, her voice steady but tense. "Most lookouts don't receive this briefing until they've either completed their term or—" She left the alternative unspoken. "Or they don't survive to hear it," I finished for her. She nodded once, sharply. "Carl believes you're different. Your handling of the first 2 encounters suggests you might have the psychological fortitude to complete your 14-month assignment." I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped me. Fortitude? I nearly lost my mind both times. "But you didn't." Ramirez leaned forward, fixing me with an intense stare. "That already places you in rare company, Thorn." She opened the first folder, revealing black and white photographs of Pinewood Tower dated 1967. The structure looked remarkably unchanged. "The Forest Service has been documenting what happens at Pinewood for decades." She laid out more photos in chronological order, 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, each showing the same tower against an unchanging backdrop of pines. "But our understanding predates even these records." She unfolded a yellowed map that crackled with age, carefully spreading it across the photos. Hand-drawn markings indicated landmarks I recognized: Black Rock Mountains, Riverdale, but with unfamiliar names in faded ink. A circular area encompassing Pinewood's location was marked with symbols I didn't recognize. "This map dates to 1892, Ramirez explained, "created by government surveyors working with local Chinook tribes. The area where your tower stands was marked as forbidden ground. The indigenous people called it a thin place, where the boundary between our world and something else lacks normal integrity. Something else, I repeated. The term fell short of describing the intelligence I'd encountered twice now, the calculated malice, the hunger. Ramirez opened another folder. Since establishing the first lookout at that location in 1967, we've lost 23 Forest Service employees assigned to Pinewood Tower. The color-coded list documented each lookout's fate with bureaucratic precision. Thomas Randall, 1967. Missing, presumed, dead, Eliza Connors, 1968. Mental health separation. Howard Jennings, 1969. Missing, presumed dead. The list continued, page after page of lives disrupted or ended. Only 4 names had been marked with green checks, indicating completed assignments. Only 4 people have made it through all 14 months, I said, my mouth suddenly dry. 4 out of 27, Ramirez confirmed. You would be the 5th. I pushed back from the table, the legs of my chair scraping against linoleum. Why keep sending people there if you know what happens? Ramirez's expression remained carefully neutral. That brings us to the purpose of this meeting, Thorne. I'm authorized to offer you immediate reassignment to any other tower in the district. No penalties, no black marks on your record. You've encountered something beyond normal understanding and survived twice. No one would blame you for walking away. The offer hung in the air between us. What happens if Pinewood stands empty? I asked. Ramirez's gaze flicked to a separate folder, still closed. There have been 3 periods when we temporarily suspended operations at Pinewood Tower. Each instance corresponded with a statistically significant increase in missing persons reports from Riverdale and surrounding communities. Jesus. I ran a hand through my hair. So, it's either sacrifice the lookout or sacrifice civilians. That's unnecessarily melodramatic, Thorne. Ramirez tapped the folder with one manicured fingernail, but not entirely inaccurate. Whatever exists at that location appears to require monitoring. When left unobserved, its influence extends beyond the immediate vicinity of the tower. She finally opened the last folder, revealing a worn, leather-bound journal. This belonged to Marcus Chen, one of the 4 lookouts who completed his term. His observations from 2003 might prove valuable if you choose to return. I stared at the journal, its pages dog-eared and scribbled with handwritten notes. Did he explain how he survived? Not explicitly, but his entries documented a pattern. Ramirez slid the journal toward me. The entity grows stronger with each visit, but also more predictable. Its evolution follows recognizable stages. Chen believed understanding the pattern was key to his survival. I picked up the journal, its leather cover worn smooth by desperate hands. You're saying I can't defeat this thing, but I can outlast it. Containment, not victory, is the realistic goal. Ramirez straightened the folders with mechanical precision. Meanwhile, certain specialists are pursuing more permanent solutions. Specialists? I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. What kind of specialists deal with ancient entities from beyond our world? For the first time, Ramirez's professional demeanor cracked slightly. That information is above both our clearance levels, Thorne. I'm simply told they require more time. And lookouts buy that time with their sanity or their lives. Ramirez didn't deny it. Your decision, Thorne? I need an answer today. I thought about the people in Riverdale, families, children. The alternative towers Ramirez offered would be safer, more normal, just weather reports and fire watches. No green lights, no mimicking voices using intimate memories as weapons. I thought about running. how easy it would be to walk away, to not look back. I thought about the 23 names on that list. "I'm going back," I said. Something that might have been respect flickered across Ramirez's face. "Chen's journal is yours to keep. His insights might save your life." She reached into her desk drawer and removed a small wooden box. These items were also recovered from successful lookouts: traditional tools, iron implements, specially prepared salt with certain properties. Nothing technological. The entity disrupts electronics, as you've discovered. I took the box, feeling its weight. Why me? Why not tell every lookout from the beginning? "Policy decisions made long before my time," Ramirez said, the bureaucratic shield returning to her voice. "Experience showed that unprepared lookouts sometimes survived, while those with foreknowledge suffered psychological breaks before their first encounter. So I passed some kind of test, in a manner of speaking." Ramirez stood, extending her hand formally. "Good luck, Thorne. Carl will maintain regular contact. Report everything, no matter how insignificant it seems. Any detail might be valuable to those working on a more permanent solution." I shook her hand, still processing everything I'd learned. 14 months, 11 more visits to survive. 1 month at a time, Ramirez advised. That's how the successful ones managed it. I left headquarters with Chen's journal, the wooden box, and a new understanding of my purpose at Pinewood. Not just a fire lookout, a sentinel at the boundary between worlds. The drive back took 4 hours, my mind churning with everything Ramirez had revealed. I pulled over twice to read passages from Chen's journal, his handwriting growing increasingly erratic as the entries progressed through his term. But there was method beneath the madness, detailed observations of how the entity evolved, adapted, and most importantly, how it could be temporarily contained. By the time I reached Pinewood, afternoon shadows stretched across the clearing. The tower stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, no longer just my isolated workplace, but a post that needed manning. I made 3 trips carrying supplies up the stairs, not just food and water, but the tools Ramirez had provided. Iron nails with strangely shaped heads, packages of salt mixed with herbs I didn't recognize, mirrors with symbols etched into their frames. Inside, I transformed the tower according to Chen's specifications. Salt lines at specific angles, not just across doorways. Iron nails positioned like compass points. Mirrors arranged to reflect each other in a pattern that made my eyes hurt if I looked at it too long. As sunset approached, I read the final pages of Chen's journal, absorbing his last pieces of advice. The entity learns, but only in linear progression. It cannot skip ahead or try previously unsuccessful approaches again. Each visit follows the last in logical sequence. Track its evolution, and you can predict what comes next. It cannot cross the salt lines if the salt is mixed with the third ingredient and formed into the sacred geometries. The Forest Service will provide the mixture if requested for rodent control. Iron continues to repel it, but observe the specific configurations. The positions matter more than the material. Above all, remember it must obey certain rules. It can only stay until dawn. It cannot physically harm you unless invited. Its power comes from your belief in what it shows you. I finished preparations as darkness fell. Chen's journal indicated the entity's third visit would focus on visual manifestations rather than auditory ones. It would attempt to make me doubt reality itself, showing me things that couldn't possibly exist. The clock read 7:38 p.m. when I positioned myself in the tower's center, surrounded by layers of protection arranged according to Chen's specifications. Tonight would be different. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore, but for the people who might disappear if I abandoned this post. I checked my watch. 4 hours until the green light would appear. 4 hours to prepare mentally for whatever impossible horrors the entity would conjure. I opened Chen's journal to a blank page near the back and picked up a pen. If I was going to serve as sentinel at this boundary, I needed to document everything. Future lookouts would need every advantage I could provide. My first entry was brief, but resolute. September 1st. Third visit imminent. Prepared according to Chen's specifications. The entity will return tonight and 11 more times during my term. I don't need to defeat it, just contain it. 1 month at a time. I closed the journal and faced the windows, watching for the first hint of green on the northern horizon. There would be no running, no hiding. Just endurance, vigilance, and the determination to stand guard where others had fallen. I wasn't merely a lookout anymore. I was the watchman at the threshold, the keeper of the boundary, the sentinel between worlds, and I would not yield.